Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CloudEagle SaaS Masterminds podcast. Today on the show, we have Nicole. She's VP of Finance at Clover's. Nicole, welcome. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Hey, Nicole, for the audience benefit, would you be able to introduce yourself in your own words? Maybe like how long have you been with the company, a little bit of your background, and some fun facts that you want to share with the audience here.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Nicole Jordan Dadal. I've been with Clover since the beginning. We started in early 2021. And I've been with Clover since then. I'm in charge of actually both finance and HR at Clover's. But my background is very much FP&A, strategic finance. That's really my first love. But as with all startups, we all got to jump in and fill in the gaps and help wherever we can. And I've also really come to enjoy HR too. It's been a really fun learning experience. Fun fact. Wow, that's tough. Um, this is totally random, but I really love frogs. They're like one of my favorite animals, and I find that's not a super common thing for people to love. So I
Oh,
love
that's really a fun fact. Yeah, I'm gonna remember that now every time I see a frogs.
right? Yeah, but I like to tell people that because that's not what most people pick, and most people are like, "Oh, I love dogs," and I do. I have two dogs, but I really love
Frogs
frogs.
is your thing? Okay, awesome. That's great. Hey, Nicole, so moving on, like, in your career journey, like, you've definitely grown through the ranks at Clover's. But if somebody was aspiring to have work at a startup, be a finance leader, any career advice from your own journey that you would share, like, hey, because you're pretty young and you have grown that much at Clover, so that's very commendable. And a lot of people would want to be in your shoes. So like, if anything you can share.
Yeah. So I gotta say, I'm very fortunate. My dad was in the business world, and from a young age, I just kind of expressed a lot of interest in that. And my dad owns his own company, and so he was really able to pull me in and teach me about companies, particularly small ones, because he owns a small M&A firm from a really young age. So I had some luck on my side for sure. He taught me about budgeting and forecasting when I was like 12. So
Uh,
I've got a bit of luck on my side. I don't want to discount that at all. However, one of the best pieces of advice he gave me when I was graduating college, was that I should go work at a big company. And then if I was interested and if I was still really interested in being at smaller startups, that then I could go work at smaller startups later. And that's what I did. I worked at some large S&P 500 companies for the first 5 to 10 almost years of my career. And I learned a lot in those situations. I learned a lot about what I didn't like, mostly that. But I also learned things that I did like. And I got exposure to a lot of different people, a lot of different ways of doing things. And it was really important. So, it wasn't until a few years ago that I was finally like, all right, I think I've gotten what I need from these big companies, and it wasn't the best fit for me culturally. And I was like, great, I'm gonna jump into small startups. So particularly younger grads or people in the younger generation,
mhm.
get a big company, go learn how it even works, because a lot of us, we jump out of college and we're just like, I don't even know how corporations operate. Like, what is this? And you can learn a lot that way and then bring that into the startup and then use your experience, leverage that into, helping the startup grow.
Yeah, no, I think that's very insightful, Nicole. I think like, understanding what that end state looks like how do big corporations work? What are they good at? What are they not good at? Right. And taking those learnings and bringing it to the startup world, because I mean, we as startups definitely want to like get people who have seen it all, right? Who have seen like the bigger picture, understand what their job amounts to. So I think that's really helpful to have that perspective coming
Yeah.
in.
Corporations, they're constantly like changing, they're constantly acquiring. disposition it, you know, like they're constantly doing all these things. They're laying off people, they're hiring people, they're in a constant state of flux. And so it's a really, really easy and quick way to learn. Startups are too, but you don't have anyone else to lean on. I'm a finance team of basically one with my accountant. I'm an HR team of one. Who am
Yeah.
I who am I gonna
Yeah.
reach out to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Definitely having that network and that experience that you can rely on is really helpful. So I know, Nicole, like, coming out of COVID, you guys were born in 2021, not too long ago, right? Things have definitely shifted from like, in the last 3, 4 years, and like there's more change. I think right before this call, we were also talking about, so your priorities for 2024, right? I mean, we're starting the year out. Would love to hear like how they've changed from 2023. What is your focus area in? It would be really helpful for the audience to even understand, how our companies or how our finance leaders thinking about 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of discussions about this internally, of course, you know, and even with our investors. And I think obviously the overall mission of Clover's, you know, really putting people first, hiring first, you know, really being sure that organizations are able to see the individual behind the application and make the best choice um doesn't change. But financially speaking and, you know, how we want to position ourselves, absolutely it does. Um, I think as a startup, you are particularly an earlier stage startup, you're pretty beholden to the financial environment, right? And you know, I guess that you could argue public companies are too, right? Their share
Yeah.
price you
Yeah.
know, freaks out. So I guess we all are to a degree, but you know, particularly when you're raising money, you know, if VC firms are closing the purse strings a little bit more, they're holding it a little bit more tightly. You have to show more ARR, right?
Yeah.
You have to show more growth. You have to show more retention. You have to show more of these metrics that they've always been looking at, but maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, they were a little bit more loose on who they'd give money to.
Yeah.
Um, and they still have money to invest, and I think that that's something that I would like to remind everyone. Like, a lot of people are online, I'm seeing freaking out like, "Oh, VCs aren't investing, no one's investing." That's really not true.
Yeah.
Um, they still have money to invest. It's just a matter
Yeah.
of if they're going to invest in you or not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, and it's not so much a given anymore. And so I think it's really important in 2024 that the focus be on longevity,
Yeah.
right? Like extending the runway as much as you possibly can, without impacting your roadmap too much or, you know, making too much of an impact on the product, because you still want your product to be something that customers are excited to use, customers want, customers need, more
Yeah.
importantly, right? And I think that's one of the most challenging balances when you're trying to reduce your burn, is figuring out where you can save money that's
Mhm.
not going to impact the roadmap, whether it's headcount, right? No one wants to talk about that. I get it. Whether it's software, right? We just identified recently a piece of software we were spending $30,000 a year on, I think, that we're able to replace with a free
Hmm.
version.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's software spend really creeps up on people. I know you know better than anyone, right?
Yeah.
Software spend really, really creeps up on you. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, here's a credit card, go get what you need. And suddenly $30 a month adds up
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
that 500, right?
Those five
So
become 50 seats and these 50 become 500 before you know it, right? And nobody's paying attention to that, right? So,
yeah,
and I
and
know like,
particularly in times like this, if your headcount is changing, you know, like you were saying too, okay, I bought 500 seats. Oh, but now I'm only using 250 of those seats. And no
yeah,
one, you know, thinks to cut those seats down, right?
yeah,
So, you know, anyway, in short, to answer your question, extending the runway as long as possible, because I do think, you know, by 2025, we'll probably see a little bit more excitement from VCs investing again.
yeah.
Um, but you gotta survive till then, right?
Yeah. And Nicole, I think like what I'm gathering from your observation, like your comment here is like being nimble, right, to the changing market needs, right? Because 2025 will definitely, you will see things turn around and you just have to live long enough to see that, right? So as a
Yeah.
company, for sure. And, the luxury that startups don't have is time, right? So being like, hey, like, where's my head count, right? Am I spending on software and other discretionary or like, other spend that I'm having as a finance leader? That's really important, and give visibility to your execs, right? As to like what is sensible spending without curtailing growth, right?
Yeah.
So that's really important to have. So I know like we have been with the journey on like how we can optimize your software spend, right? So like, when you were starting out on this project, how did you even realize that this was something that you should like focus on? Or even like, this was something that an area that you thought that would be something if you tapped on, right, you would be able to save, right? The example that you gave, right? Hey, 30K
Yeah.
that you're able to leverage with the free software, right? Because the speed like of innovation of companies is definitely of the vendors itself is changing as well. Something that, they could charge money now, it's free, right? So how did you even understand like when did you realize that this was a problem for you guys?
That's a good question. Well, my background is strategic finance, right? So I'm pretty much always looking at our P&L. And as I'm looking at it, I'm looking at our hosting cost, I'm looking at our COGS, I'm looking at our, general software spend, and I'm seeing, the percentage of our expenses that is getting aggressive, right? And I'm seeing, okay, we're a pretty small company. We're a pretty early stage and we're growing, but every time we're closing more deals, but we're also spending a lot more on our technology. And there's something to be said. There's value in this software. Like, there's obviously value in a lot of this software, and a lot of it is COGS. Well, we need in order for our product to function, right? No denying that. But it can get out of control. And when I start getting questions from investors and even from myself, like I'm asking myself, hey, well, what makes up this software bucket? Okay, I can see in QuickBooks the names of the software and what we're spending each month, but like, how many seats are they actually? Are we really utilizing all of it? Do
Mm,
I need this software? And ask my engineering to, my VP of engineering, hey, do you really need this software, for the product to function? Hey, what's going on with AWS hosting? Like, why is this cost continuing to creep up and up and up? And as I'm asking these questions, I'm realizing that I don't have the data that I would want in
mm,
order to really make effective decisions. And QuickBooks is great. I love QuickBooks, but it just wasn't able to give me that level of detail. When are these contracts renewing? I don't know. So how do I know that they're not just gonna auto renew at a higher rate than I want?
yeah,
And it's the loss of control that I realized I had, and how problematic it was, especially going into a season that I saw was going to be a time of really wanting to extend our runway. Because this was mid last year that we started talking, I think.
yeah,
I said, all right, this is probably going to be a runway extension season. We really don't want to be wasting a single dollar. And I just didn't have control, just being
yeah.
totally honest. It's hard to admit that, but I didn't have the control that I needed.
Yeah, Nicole, I think that's very insightful, right? Like as you said, right? Coming from a strategic finance background and having and seeing like before the season changed, right? Like, hey, the season is about to change. So let me put the controls in place, right? While QuickBooks gives you an inventory, doesn't tell you where the wastage is happening, right? And being able to get that insight as well as like, hey, renewals are coming up, being able to negotiate with the vendors. Again, like your focus is obviously running the operations of the company and not, negotiating with vendors. So completely understand like any challenges that you faced when you were doing it yourself or like, I mean, one of the things that people cite is time, lack of time, right? If they had insurmountable time, they could do that themselves. But yeah, what were some of the other challenges that you were, um,
Yeah, well, I mean, as I noted, I run HR and finance, so time is obviously a huge a huge problem for me.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, yeah, I guess if I had the time, I would have put a whole spreadsheet together. I would have put all of our software. I would have put how much, when the renewal date is, and I would have kept up with it all the time. You know, back in my analyst days, if that was one of my main duties, I would have done it, and it would have been great. I love Excel. It would have been perfect. But that's not the situation that I'm in now. And I didn't have time to not just put it together. I could have put it together. I didn't have time to maintain it, right? Being pulled in every other direction and maintaining, like, hey, when does this renew? How much did we pay last year? Okay, well, what could we possibly pay this year? And then on top of that, the negotiation, which you also touched on, that takes time too. You know, I gotta email, oh wait, I have to follow up. They didn't respond to me. Oh, our contract is up in 45 days and I have to give them 30 days notice. Let's make sure that this is done. I mean, it's the
It's a
minutia.
mental workload that you need to carry on in
That
addition to,
mental workload is the best way to put it. It's really the mental workload of the
yeah,
renewal. In addition to, again, I wanted to be able to answer questions of like, hey, how much are we spending on Zoom? Hey, how many licenses do we have on Zoom? And are we actually using them as an example, right? I wanted to be able to answer those questions too.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. So Nicole, I think this is really insightful. I know we only allocated so much time for this, right? Anything else that you wanted to add in closing for like the audience, like just in general, like 2024, like cost spend management, like making sure that the operations are running fine?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say, um, this might sound like it's coming out of left field. It's a curveball a bit, but I do run HR and finance. I've said it a few times, and I do want to remind everyone of the importance of investing in their people. I understand headcount reductions can often be necessary, and I get that. Um, but even after that's occurred, I don't want finance leaders to lose sight of the fact that it is still important to invest in your people. And, you know, however that looks like, you get to decide. But the team that you're left with, you know, you're really asking them to stick it out with you through this
Yeah,
actually difficult time, right? And you can't forget that. I think it's easy for finance leaders to brush off
yeah,
HR and initiatives. And now that I'm running both, it's
yeah,
a lot more insight into that. So I just want to remind them, hey, you know, be sure you invest in your employees. You're saving all this money and that's awesome. And you're reducing your runway and you do it, right? Do it as much as you can,
yeah.
but not at the expense of your employees.
Yeah, Nicole, I think that's very sane advice, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a human element, and like, it's like, my saying is that you are in a, rowboat, right, with commandos on, right? Like, we definitely need people who have a mission and vision, right, to succeed and like like really serve our customers well, right? So that's
Yep.
really important. The human element, you can't take it away, especially when, I mean, I come from like an Excel background, like I love
Yeah.
Excel. Right?
When
So
you're that type of person, it's easy to forget the human element. And, you know, I've been guilty of that for sure before. And this has been part of my growth, my personal and professional growth is like, hey, there's a really, really important human element to this.
yeah,
And you cannot forget it when you're in the
yeah,
numbers or doing all the, don't
yeah,
forget it.
yeah. No, I think that's a great closing comment, right? So really appreciate Nicole you joining the call.
Yeah,
Really
absolutely.
appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much and sharing your advice with the audience.
Yeah, yeah. I love partnering with CloudEagle.
Thank you. Thanks so much.